A very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Nadine Bader. I'm working at GIZ on a project on food systems transformation, and I'm the moderator for the webinar today. And I would like to welcome you, of course, on behalf of all the organizations that have joined hands to organize this webinar. This is the Coalition for Food Systems Transformation in India, in short, COFTI, then the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, the National Institute of Urban Affairs, and the Indo-German Center for Sustainability, along with GIZ India. So we are very thrilled to have you join this webinar today on rethinking urban food environments in India. And this is the first webinar of a series that we are planning. And we're starting today with the guiding question: how can food policy councils contribute to a sustainable transformation on urban food systems in India? And we have a wonderful lineup of presenters and panelists from different parts of the world. So we are really happy about that. Thank you already for joining us. And before we get actually started with the webinar, I would like to announce some housekeeping rules. First of all, we are recording this webinar. So if you have any concerns, then please keep your camera off. Otherwise, we would love to invite all of you to switch on your cameras to make this webinar lively and to see who is there. Also, we are using throughout the session the chat function. So if you have any questions to any of the presenters or the panelists, please use the chat function, put in your questions. Also, kindly write the name to the person you would like to pose the question to, so we can later in the Q&A session that we have at the end pick up your questions. Also, throughout the webinar, we are using Slido for some poll questions. We will guide you through the process once they are coming up, because we also want to hear and learn from you who is there and what are your insights with the Food Policy Council topic. If you are facing any technical issues, we also have a team on board. So just write in the chat and the team members will try to assist and help you to make it work. And with that, we are looking forward to an informative and fruitful exchange. And I would love to invite now Mr. Pavan Agarwal, the CEO and founder of Food Future Foundation and integral part to drive COFTI, and share his brief introduction and context for the webinar. Over to you. You are muted, Pavan.
So thank you, Nadine. I joined Nadine Bader to welcome you all to this very interesting webinar, which received an overwhelming response. So this is a unique a collective of stakeholders and partners, which we are calling as Coalition for Food System Transformation in India, which envisions to transform India's food systems so that they work both for people and the planet. So whenever we think of food, what comes to our mind is farms, rural areas, which obviously where the food is grown. But we do not realize that increasingly a large part of that food is consumed in urban areas by city dwellers. And that has also not received adequate attention by policymakers at the national level or even at the municipal levels. Food policy councils are instruments that have come up across the world to address food related concerns in urban areas. And this webinar is focused on that. We have with us, Mr. Rahul Kapoor, Joint Secretary of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. He is also the Mission Director of National Mission for Smart Cities in India, and holding various other charges. So I'll not take your time in explaining what other charges he is holding. And with this, let me invite Mr. Kapoor to set the context for this webinar in terms of the thinking of the government in this respect, what they have done and what they foresee happening in this space. I invite Mr. Rahul Kapoor.
Thank you so much. First of all, a few of the familiar faces earlier when we did work on the Eat Smart Cities challenge here, and I'd like to say hi to all of them. I think globally we see that there's an increasing recognition for the role that cities need to play in terms of creating sustainable food environments. Uh, we started that journey around 3 years back here in the ministry when we were in the Smart Cities mission, engaging in a dialogue with FSSAI. And at that point of time, when the words were put to us, I think all of us who are in the urban sector, and especially here in India, those who work in urban infrastructure, we were slightly confused on what does it mean to create a food vision for cities, creating a sustainable food environment. I mean, what does it have to do with urban? Because in urban, we basically look at maybe water supplies, sanitation, transportation, and mobility issues, and issues that are more civic in nature. But somewhere the way we have been structured here in India, probably the roles are very different. There's a very siloed approach to food and nutrition in cities. Work here, maybe probably in their own isolation. So I think that was the first for us, trying to think on how do you imbibe a food vision into your urban planning approach, and how do you create building blocks. And I think somewhere COVID-19 now, hopefully it's distant past, but at that point of time, it was becoming very important. When we were all in a lockdown phase, I think we would probably not remember, but that was when we started thinking on all these issues and challenges that were being posed to us, and how do we bring about a behavior change in the way we live in our cities, be it making cities more cycle friendly or pedestrian friendly, or looking at creating food ecosystems. And that's where the Eat Smart idea came about. Uh, of course, at that time, the thought was more on creating safe, healthy, and sustainable food ecosystems. Now, the word sustainability is very important because the challenge is now over. We did have successes by way of the participation that we saw during that time of engagement, and there was a lot of engagement that happened as part of that program. But moving forward, the learnings that we have got, how do we scale that up? I think that is a question that is posed before us as urban planners. Because from 11 cities, we need to look at the whole country where we have close to 4,912. That was the number which I checked yesterday. The number of urban local bodies that are there in India. And the kind of concerns that come about. The whole approach has to be multi stakeholder and collaborative kind of an approach. And the objective that we need to really look at is how do we integrate food systems into urban planning, because today it is not a core function of the urban local bodies. If you see India the way it has been structured here, a municipal commissioner would probably not have this as a part of his priority, but then it does affect his work indirectly. So when it comes to any health related challenges that happen in terms of, let us say, if there are concerns with regard to hygiene and that leads to deaths, or the health expenditure that goes up because of these issues, somewhere it becomes a very important part for them to basically work with other partners in the ecosystem. We need to look at the kind of choices that consumers make. Today, if you're looking at healthy lifestyles for individuals, so what kind of choices are available to them, and how do you enable them to basically exercise those choices? So the options and opportunities that need to be made available to them is an area of work. How do we improve the health outcomes of the food that is being made available, the nutrition value, so that overall the expenditure on healthcare system goes down? uh, Improving the hygiene credibility of food becomes very important. Today the gig economy has become very important here, with a lot of food delivery platforms that are delivering food, but then hygiene and safety are a concern there. So what kind of a rating, ranking, or certification mechanism do we build so as to ensure that hygiene and trust is there in that food that we are ordering? Of course, it also ends up promoting the tourism in that area, and along with that, livelihood creation. As I was being introduced, some of the other charges that I have been handling, one is the street vendors scheme in the country, which works with street vendors directly, and many of them are street food vendors. Now, the whole focus of the government of India is currently on this particular vulnerable group, which did not really have a very strategic kind of intervention maybe a decade back. But today, we have got a scheme for microcredit access, financial inclusion, and also the infrastructural elements when you're looking at, let us say, working on development of vending markets and creation of vending zones. So the regulatory part is there, but how do we do that more effectively? And while we are doing that, imbibing the right kind of food nutrition and basically the food habits that we want to have over there when it comes to sanitation, it requires convergence with some of the other missions here in the country that are operating. So that was one part. And I was also reading some of the successes that were there in the Eat Smart Cities challenge. So one of the cities like Rourkela basically engaged the women self-help groups. Now these are urban poor, and that's the third mission that I'm handling, the urban livelihood mission. So how do we basically mobilize these urban poor women into this food ecosystem? So not only do we create livelihoods, but we also make the whole food and hygiene system better. So somewhere we need to look at promoting the local economy in our overall strategy, so that creates livelihood and also address a lot of gender related issues by improving the participation of women in the workforce. Creating a greener environment definitely becomes green choices. So, how do you reduce your carbon footprint when you are looking at food management? Of course, it does require creation of a very strong data ecosystem as well, because evidence-based planning would require you to have right kind of inputs. Today, uh, maybe it's not really very related, but how this data can play a role in your decision making. So I was reading a news article about reduction in the population of vultures in India, and how that was probably related to a medicine which was a painkiller at that point of time, diclofenac, which was also being used in animals, and somewhere that led to a fall in the vulture population. But then that affected the basically the scavenging activities that were there, and as a result, with a very high bovine population, the healthcare challenges increased. There were a lot of deaths in those cities where the population had declined significantly. So somewhere data and evidence can help you decide on what kind of policy you would want. So similar kind of approach is also required when it comes to your food ecosystems. So of course, going back into the past, we focused on 5 areas of intervention at that point of time. The regulatory framework under the Eat Right India movement talked about licensing and registration. So first step would be the identification of who are the stakeholders, who are the players in the ecosystem. And starting with that, the next step would be the benchmarking and certification of through the entire value chain. So when you're looking at production, when you're looking at marketing, when you're looking at distribution, somewhere that certification would become very, very important. Changing the food settings in various spaces like workspaces, or when you're looking at even schools and colleges. So you have departmental canteens here in the offices. That's how it works here. But somewhere, what kind of food are we serving there? So it should start from home, but somewhere that has not really happened to that effect. Of course, creating
Yeah.
sustainable food environments by reducing waste is going to be critical here. And advocacy and communication strategy with regard to behavior change, and how do we basically reduce food adulteration or reduce the intake of fats or salt or sugar, or even making India trans fat free. I think looking at this, while I was going through the brief, I read about the food policy councils and the kind of good work that has happened globally. Somewhere that kind of an institutional mechanism can help us plan better. And when I was talking about data ecosystems, see, we did create a few of city ranking parameters, the ease of living index, the municipal performance index. So these indicator frameworks basically create the data evidence that help us do data-driven governance or evidence-based planning. Somewhere including the key performance indicators that help us define our food ecosystem and the objectives that we want to reach out to would be very, very helpful. It has worked with us here in the Smart Cities mission, because a competitive approach by way of when we did the Eat Smart Cities challenge, that somehow nudges the cities to basically reach their goals or targets. So somewhere aligning our overall objectives and using a challenge process or a competitive federalism process to motivate cities and urban local bodies is probably going to be a useful approach. So I think with that, I will conclude here. I would be happy to listen to some of the other panelists and the overall output of this particular workshop. So with that, I rest my voice. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kapoor. Thanks a lot for your encouraging words. And we are very thrilled that you also shared the importance of integrating the food systems approach in urban planning and giving such a comprehensive perspective from your side. That's very encouraging. Thank you so much for that. And with that, we would like to go to the next slide, please. We prepared a question because we would like to know who is in our webinar. So kindly take your phones and scan the QR code or check in the chat the link to that Slido. We would really want to know who all is here. Yeah, so please take your time to open that link, and we can also share then the screen to the live polling. Thank you. So we have 25 people that logged in as of now. Most of them from academia, students, research. "32. I think we are in the webinar more than 80 people, so probably a few more of you managed to join. I hope it's working for everyone. And while you are still voting, we would, in interest of time, go back to our slideshow and continue with the program, but feel free to add your responses to that question. So we would like to start now with our first input with a presentation from Dr. Christoph Woiwode and Peter Volz. So I'm just giving a short introduction to them. Christoph is currently a senior researcher at the Leibniz Institute of Ecological, Urban and Regional Development in the research area Landscape, Ecosystems and Biodiversity. And he is also linked to IIT Madras after having been there for 8 years, a resident visiting professor with the Indo-German Center for Sustainability at IIT Madras. And we have also Peter with us, who holds a diploma in social science and South Asian studies, as well as a master's in environmental governance. And he has been one of the founders of the Agronauten. We will learn more about it. And he has been working on many projects regarding local supply chains, cooperation of citizens and farmers, as well as governance innovations and short added value chains. He's teaching at universities and is involved in projects in Germany, Europe, and South Asia. And with that, I would like to hand over to both of you, sharing your experience from Chennai. And if you can kindly stick to the time of 10 minutes, that would be really appreciated. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadine, and welcome to everybody in this round here. It's really great to see the interest in this topic. And what we would like to do in the next 10 minutes is roughly to provide an overview how we started actually working on this topic, coming from a research organization. This is a long way to go, and our interest, in fact, started with the inception of the Indo-German Center for Sustainability, building an agenda on urban research. And part of this research was, of course, the pressing challenges for a city like Chennai, where we began to investigate the growth dynamics and also the different dimensions of the implications that this growth might entail, and in particular in terms of the outskirts of the city, which we then call peri-urbanization. And our early research was very much foundational research, data collection, various aspects of understanding growth patterns also in the villages. But in our more recent research, we understood this process as a part of the Anthropocene, in fact. And this research was therefore also called the Pericene, where we try to understand how climate environmental change intersects with urbanization processes at various levels, from the local community level to the urban regional level, and then also the global level. But what we wanted to do was as well to provide a vision and also a strategic approach of co-designing adaptive pathways, as we call them, for future development of a peri-urban region that might lead towards more sustainability and higher levels of climate resilience. And what we were faced with is the whole question of defining a region. And our approach was to look at the region from a bio systems approach. You might also have heard of bioregional development approaches. And what you see here on this map is, in fact, the large area, which is the dotted line here, spanning across Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh state, and Tamil Nadu. This is the watershed area, which is a defining region and a defining systems approach, an ecological systems approach to understanding the region, the metro region of Chennai, because water is one of those determinants of the urban development process in Chennai. You know, this is a coastal city, so there are challenges in terms of cyclones, natural disasters, increasingly also the uncertainties of the monsoon season, and the city has had several floods occurrences in the past few years. So flooding and water management is one of the big areas of urban development intervention. And then we defined the region also in terms of what are the arising challenges around the closer metro region. And Chennai is at the moment in the process of developing a master plan, which is a great opportunity to also discuss newly emerging topics, for example, urban farming and urban gardening as one of those sectoral approaches. Given these challenges, we then want to move towards how do we actually envision this future approach to integrating an agroecological pathway or an urban farming approach in the city. And because we are facing dramatic challenges in terms of land conversion, where not only agricultural land, but also water bodies have been reduced to a large scale in the urbanizing region. And this is what you see here in the red markers. This is the larger planning region of Chennai. And here we try to look into what could be co-benefits if we think about an agroecological development pathway, which is, of course, implications for wetland conservation, water management, but of course also food sovereignty, creating resilient communities, providing livelihood opportunities, improving nutrition, but flood risk management as well, or microclimate and heat island impacts, the reduction of heat islands in the city by retaining large-scale open land, and as well, of course, greenhouse gas mitigation. And finally, something that is hard to measure in many ways, simply a quality of urban life where the dynamics are increasingly infringing our quality and also our living standards. So there may be even more factors that are involved here. But what you see here on the map is an initial attempt to look into which kind of areas could be potentially also used for urban farming. And we are, what is the green marked area here, we have decided as one visionary idea to look into those areas that might be aligned with the river courses. So these are 4 of the main river bodies that stretch through the region. And this is potential land. So we are looking already at the potential of what kind of land could be also used for this particular purpose. And then we went a step further because water bodies infringement and the reduction of water bodies is at the heart of the urban development challenges for for a city like Chennai, and as you know, also in many other parts of India, metropolitan cities are faced with this. We thought we can also look at the multiple water bodies which are not perennial around Chennai to protect their soft edges, because these are those water bodies that collect the monsoon rains and then are being used for agricultural purposes. But when agriculture is being diminished as a livelihoods activity, the water bodies are also being neglected. So there is a direct connection between these two activities and the essentiality, basically, of securing water and also preventing flood risks. Now, having said this as providing the larger picture, we try to start with some interventions. And in 2021, we had a research fellowship through the IGCS, and we began with a pilot study to understand what are these stakeholders that are active in this area. And Peter will talk a bit more in detail about these stakeholders and what they actually do. And this was followed then by an initial stakeholder workshop in August 2022, where we brought together around 40 people who work in this sector based on our stakeholder mapping. But then we ran out of funding, and it was difficult to actually continue this activity. But the idea was, one of the major outcomes was that we need to build a network of collaborating partners. Otherwise, this is not going further. And recently, earlier this year, we received funding from a company in Chennai, with which we commenced this project, Rise Chennai, Agroecology for Resilience, Sustainability and Entrepreneurship, which will run for about 18 months, where we are trying out now different activities to provide an online platform where this network of stakeholders can interact through a newsletter, where they can get in touch with each other. And this will be accompanied by face-to-face workshops, a series of workshops to build this momentum. So we see ourselves more like an enabler at the IGCS, but at the same time also providing supplementary research. For example, expanding the idea of what areas can the food shed.
Yeah.
And these are some of the core activities. And I'm handing over to Peter now.
Yeah, we have like maximum 2 more minutes, Peter, if you can wrap it up.
Yeah, I would just like to say hello, everybody. My name is Peter Volz. Just to explain what I was doing in Chennai, I was basically there for a fellowship together with IGCS, and I basically had the opportunity over some months in 2021 to look at the possibilities of establishing food policy councils in India and Chennai, how it could be. You see here, we were going around on the Royal Enfield. We were visiting Koyambidu market, all kinds of stakeholders in Chennai to look what are the obstacles and the possibilities for creating a food policy council. I can show you some examples here of people that's from restaurant owners to policymakers, to farmers, obviously, to all kinds of traders and so on, to get a good overview. How can we understand what is happening in Chennai? How can we get the food system perspective? And also then how can we move ahead? And the outcome is this report. And I'm going to put also the link to this report in the group chat so everybody can access that report. And basically we have outlined how these things can happen. And our recommendations were that we should create like this pathway that we should bring all the people together. How can we create a food policy council? How can we bring people together who otherwise don't cooperate, who work in their own silos, who don't have much exchange? And actually that brings a lot of possibilities also, I feel, to move ahead. Now, in the recent project, we see that these points that we wanted to do that have been highlighted here, like have transformation labs, like also have a study what is actually the situation of Chennai, how does Chennai feed itself as of now, and also to get involved with global networks, that these points are already addressed in our Arise project. So we are hoping to take this idea further because it showed that there's a lot of potential in addressing the food system in this kind of city frame or city region frame, because of course it's not only the city. With that, I will pass over. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Christoph and Peter, for your comprehensive introductory presentation, learning from your Chennai example. Dear participants, if you have any questions to Christoph and Peter, kindly post them in the chat and mention their names so we can pick it up later. And with that, we continue now with Nandini Agarwal. She's a German Chancellor Fellow at the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. And in Germany, she is researching the role and impact of food policy councils in transforming urban food systems, and previously created a scalability framework for sustainable agriculture programs in India, and also authored the Millet Mantra, capturing stories of actors along the millet value chain at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water here in India. Over to you, Nandini. Looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Nadine. Thanks a lot. And thank you everyone for joining in today. So we've heard this term food policy councils. I think Mr. Rahul Kapoor set a very good context from the policy perspective in India. And we heard from Peter and Christoph about what's happening in Chennai. I'm sure many of us have this question in mind, what is a food policy council? So within the next 5 minutes, I just hope to give a very brief theoretical overview about what food policy councils are. So I just want to ensure that everyone can see my screen. Nadine, if you can give me a thumbs up.
Yes.
Great, thanks. So a food policy council essentially is a group of stakeholders such as farmers, businesses, consumers, researchers, as well as policymakers who join forces to develop solutions and reform policies for urban food systems transformations towards sustainability. What that means is that the system should be able to produce and distribute food in a way that secures livelihoods of farmers, it protects the environment, and provides nutritional food for all, and emphasis to all here. This was a definition that was given by Halliday in 2019, and I'm sure we're thinking that it's quite broad. A lot is possible under this definition, and that's true because food policy councils also work in very different contexts, depending on the cities that they're established in, their socio-economic, political, agroclimatic contexts that they are developed in. So what do food policy councils do, and essentially what gap they fill, right, is the question to ask. These are just some of the photos that I've taken during my time here in Germany as a German Chancellor Fellow, where different councils are working on different kinds of themes, such as creating nutritional food for vulnerable sections of the society, starting this discussion with what food means to them. Urban agriculture is also a part of it. So the kinds of topics that food policy councils typically engage themselves with are also the topics that a city would face in general, the kinds of challenges they would face. For example, enabling access to nutritional and sustainable food for a socially, economically vulnerable sections of the society. Food policy councils also work on increasing access to or the ratio of seasonally grown sustainable food in public catering, such as schools, canteens, hospitals, and other public institutions. They work on spreading education on nutritional food. What does it even mean to eat nutritionally? What does nutrition encompass? And this is not just education in schools, but also for municipalities. In certain cities of India, it would mean looking at resident welfare associations and working closely with them, for example. They also help bridging consumers directly to regional producers for direct marketing. And they work on reduction of food waste, as well as advocating for better local policies. We're going to hear briefly from the Food Policy Council of Cologne, where they talk about what exactly a local food strategy looks like in their city, for example. And I've left a couple of blocks blank here because this is not a comprehensive list of what food policy councils can do. As mentioned, they can engage in many other themes depending on what the city really needs. I think one thing to note here is that food policy councils may not be directly acting on all of these. Many of us who are listening into this webinar may also already be engaging in some of these themes. Other organizations might be working in some of these topics. So one of the gaps that food policy councils can also really fill is that they act as a network to bring these organizations together and start coordinated action. So we don't replicate our efforts, but actually think strategically about what exactly we can do at our city level and outreach, create that kind of platform for all of the network stakeholders to come together and think about it. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on types of food policy councils. Governance structure models can be a whole different webinar series itself, I feel. But it is important to look at, well, what are the types of food policy councils that exist out there? So some of them are civil society-led organizations. Primarily, I've seen in Germany and many other countries across the Europe. These are organizations that are started by, or councils that are started by civil society actors, NGOs, consumers that come together and push the government and advocate for better policies. They may be supported by the local government also on project basis. There are some councils that are started by the government bodies themselves. This is something that we see in the USA. For example, the food policy councils are institutionalized at the mayor's office, and all of the policy decisions and implementation essentially happens from there, while they may have implementing partners on ground. And then there's the public-civil partnership in a food policy council, where both the government and the civil society organizations and consumers have equal voting capacities in terms of what kind of decisions they make and how they implement the structure of the food policy council. So just to give a brief overview of where they exist in the world, the concept of food policy council started off 2 decades ago, somewhere in 1980s in the USA. And since then, around 200 food policy councils have emerged across the country. Just to make sure that everyone knows, they may not be called food policy councils in all countries. In some countries, they may be food policy groups or food lab networks. You know, they do follow different kinds of name, but they essentially work on the same lines of food policy councils, and theoretically that's the terminology that is used. In the UK, there's over 70 food policy councils in England, for example, and also some in Scotland and Wales. In Spain, we see over 60 food policy councils, and here you see a map of Germany, Netherlands, Switzerland, and Austria with over 200 food policy councils existing in this region. There's also some notable councils in Uganda, Zambia. We're going to hear shortly from the Food Policy Council of Brazil, which is also one of the main success stories globally these days, and they also exist in Australia. So this is just to give an overview of, well, there has been a historical background to these councils for the last decades. A lot of work has been happening on these in different cities, and we hope to bring this to India and kind of start acting towards it with this webinar also. That's it from my side. Thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me on this email ID. Back to you, Nadine. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nandini. I think that gave us a very good overview of what food policy councils are. And with that, let's dive into the example of Cologne. We're having Zoe Heuschkel with us. She's a trained agricultural scientist and social anthropologist. Over the past 12 years, she worked in participatory research and innovative concepts of urban agriculture, and has been part of the Cologne Food Policy Council since it was founded in 2016, and has been on board there since 2019. And we need to start with her presentation, do the Slido question after that, because she has to leave. So over to you, Zoe, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Hello, everybody, and thanks for the invitation. My name is Zoe Heuschkel. I'm part of the Food Policy Council of Cologne. And I will talk about how Food Policy Council contribute to sustainable transformation of the urban food system. So Cologne is a city, one of the 4 German cities that have more than 1 million inhabitants. And I show you here quickly like the timeline where we started in 2014 with the first discussions, and it's a lot, so I just pick out 3 milestones. So Food Policy Council of Cologne was founded 2016 with a very nice ceremony together with the mayor of Cologne in the city hall. So that's basically the start of the whole journey. And already 1 year later, we got a funded position for 3 years to start operations. And then with this funded position, yeah.
I'm very sorry to interrupt you, but your slides are not moving and not in the slideshow. Could you put them in slideshow and then move them?
Ah, okay. I'm not sure how that would. I can see the slides moving, so I'm not sure what I need to do now.
On the bottom, there is that little screen symbol. Maybe you can press that to go in the slideshow, screen share of your PPT.
Screen sharing is stopped. Okay. I know that, well, sorry for that. That what always happens if you're in a rush.
No problem.
Yeah.
Do we also have the slides now? I don't
Can
remember,
you
sorry.
assist me technically? I'm lost right now at the moment. So I thought I started it, but it didn't work and now it disappeared.
Yeah, we just saw it.
Mhm.
Can you reshare it again?
Or maybe, I mean, I send it. Maybe you can just start it from your data.
Yeah, Kanak, do you have the slides in the? Then maybe Kanak can share
Yes,
the
yes,
screen.
I can share it.
Yeah, please share the screen. Yeah, so here you go.
Okay, cool. That's nice. So we can
Yeah.
skip like the first 3 slides to the timeline. Yeah. Okay. So, and then it needs like 3 further steps, and then we have like the arrows pointing to the most important milestones. Exactly. So the third one is where we develop the food strategy for the city of Cologne and the Edible City Action Plan. And these are like 2 things I would like to talk a little bit later on. But first, next slide, please. I would just shortly talk about our working structure. So we have like at the moment 3 funded positions in head office and working with 4 volunteer working committees tackling the topics of regional marketing, food education, urban agriculture, gastronomy, and food craftsmanship. Please, would you click until we see the So we are working on thematic projects and concepts and strategies, and we meet regularly, and we are open to all who are interested. And we have like every working committee sends 2 speakers, which form at the end the board, which decides everything which is important for us. Next slide, please. Yeah, here you can see our backbone. That's the Cologne food strategy, which we elaborated in the process, and we did a very participatory process together with stakeholders from the urban food system of Cologne and also the citizens of Cologne. We invited them to contribute to our food strategy for the city of Cologne, which we then finalized and also gave it to the Council of Cologne and it passed. So this is mandatory for every action the Food Policy Council is taking. We are always asking ourselves, how do we contribute to reach the goals of the food strategy of Cologne? So that's basically our legal document, which is the fundament of our work. Next slide, please. And the second participatory process we had was the action plan Edible City. You can see there one of our big workshops where we invited broadly all the stakeholders again and had them talk about how to design an edible city of Cologne. And we also submitted that to the City Council of Cologne, and this action plan is also approved and it passed the structure. So this is also a mandatory, it's a framework for us to maneuver and to contribute. And you see this very colorful pictures underneath. That's one of the results of the workshop above. And if you click again, then you can see also the action plan. So this is how the result was of this process. And a great success of this action plan was that we were awarded for the process and also for the result by the Edible City Network. If you click, then you can see the award, which would come up again. Yes, that it is wonderfully 2023, we got awarded for that process and the result as well. Next slide, please. And because we are not alone in Cologne, there are several other food policy councils all over Germany, and we funded the national network of food policy councils. There you can see the founding ceremony in 2023, where all the representatives of food policy councils in Germany came together and founded a network which wants to transform the food system. Next slide, please. So maybe we can skip across the learnings there. I think you might be, maybe we just go shortly into that. So it's really important that we establish a good and trusting relationship, not only like deliver demands, but also offer support, that we guarantee broad participation. That's very important, that we start small and then do the next steps, and that we also test models, how to involve our partners. And volunteer work needs full-time support. So that's one of the biggest learnings, I guess, that this structure doesn't work, or it works, but it only really functions if we have like positions they are funded. Next slide, please. And we still face some challenges, that we have scarce resources, that we have very few structures to relate to in the administrations, that the actors are very diverse. And also the topic is so complex that it's really hard for us to activate the volunteers. If you would like click 3 times, then all those points would also pop up. Right, exactly. So these are the challenges we are facing. And next slide, please. And of course, this work we are doing requires a lot of building up structures. We can see here the picture of one of the lighthouse projects. We are looking from the distance at the Koppos project, which also takes place in Freiburg. Peter knows a lot about it. And so also in Cologne, we are trying to really build up structures which are lost regarding regional supply chains, and also food hubs, so centers to bundle and to process regional food. And also we're also looking into an ecological development of food supply chains, and how to increase the purchase and the production of organic food. So this is a little bit a rush through my presentation due to short time. And sorry for that. I'm one of the volunteers, so I have job things to do around me. So but I think I gave you a little bit of an overview. And if you would click for the next slide, there you can see the boldest address you can see. That's mine. So if you have questions about that, really feel free to send me an email, because I know that was a lot of content in a very short time, together with technical difficulties. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for the invitation, and have a very great event. I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Zoe. Thanks a lot for taking out the time and sharing the encouraging example of Cologne. And thanks for the offer to the participants if they want to connect with you for further questions, because I understand also you have to go now. But nevertheless, if people have questions to you, they can also post it in the chat. We collect them and maybe we send you then an email with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, then now I need to quickly check with the team if we are doing that Slido question or move on. I think we're moving on with the next presentation for now. So I'm glad we are traveling from Germany to Brazil to learn more about a practical example about food policy councils. I would like to welcome Bruno Pimenta-Starling. And he has been an international cooperation advisor at the Undersecretariat for Food and Nutritional Security, and also works in the city of, and now you have to help me, Bruno, how to pronounce the city correctly. Can you just say the city name?
It's pronounced Belo Horizonte. Belo Horizonte.
Belo Horizonte. Thank you. So in this city, you were holding a position of international relations advisor at the International Relations Bureau since 2014. And we are very happy that you're joining us and sharing with us about your experiences on food policy councils. Over to you for 10 minutes, please.
Okay, can I share my screen here? Okay, so.
Yes.
Well, first of all, my name is Bruno. Thank you for the presentation. First of all, I'd like to thank Nadine Agaval for inviting us to take part in such an interesting event. We are very glad to be here sharing, to have this opportunity to share our experience on City Food Council. So I would like first to present how it works here in Belo Horizonte, and later, if we have some time, I can share an example of an important project that we managed to implement here through the City Food Council. Okay, so please, next slide. So here are some data about Belo Horizonte, and while we read it, I would like to highlight that we are the third largest metropolitan region in Brazil and the seventh in Latin America. And while the city of Belo Horizonte has close to 2.5 million inhabitants, the metropolitan region has more than 5.5 million. So as you see, we can't think about food in Belo Horizonte without considering our metropolitan area for one important fact. The city itself does not have a rural area. So when we are talking about we are talking about food here in Belo Horizonte, we are talking about urban farmers, right? And we are talking about the food produced with in the surroundings of the city, right? We're talking about the food produced in the metropolitan area, and also the food that is produced elsewhere in the state of Minas Gerais, which Belo Horizonte is the capital city. Next slide, please. Well, that being said, let's move forward to the Food Council itself. Well, it was established by the law, 2012 law, and establishing the council itself. So it was regulated by this law, and please, next slide, please. And through a decree that was published in 2017, it regulated the law, and the council itself was established here in Belo Horizonte. So we're talking about a food council here in Belo Horizonte that works since 2017, just before the pandemic, 3 years before the pandemics. And one important thing to highlight here is that the food and nutritional security of Belo Horizonte, I'm going to say a lot of this, COMUSAN, which is the acronym in Portuguese. It's a collegiate body of the deliberative nature within the scope of its internal functioning. So it's also part of the CISA, which is the National Food and Nutritional Security System. So it's important to highlight here that our city food council, it's part of a larger system, a national system. Please, next slide, please. So it's a part of a large social control system. It's a part which begins at the federal level with the establishment of the CISAM, which is the National Food and Nutritional Security System. And we have the mission to establish a platform for constant dialogue between the various several levels of the civil society and the public power. And from this dialogue, we try to understand the real needs of the society and the political actions and practical actions that we have to implement here in the city to solve some of this population demands. And one important thing that we have to highlight here, and we have no funding for this council to happen. So we are talking about political engagement. So if we have an administration that does not have the necessary political engagement, things could go wrong. But since we have a national law that supports us, we have some kind of security considering this kind of action. So next slide, please. So our structure, we have some representatives from the 6 representatives from the municipal executive power, 1 representative from the city council, 2 representatives from the academy, 1 representative from the school food council of Belo Horizonte, 8 representatives from the city society, 6 representatives from related areas of the food sector, which means cooperatives, public markets, private markets, right? We have a presidency which is elected every 4 years, right? And the city hall has an executive secretariat that coordinates the gatherings and the meetings that happens regularly in a regular base. I believe it's in a fortnight, every fortnight. So please, next slide. Here are some of our objectives, but I'm gonna say it in a quick way here. How we're going to try to say it quick because I believe that my time is running out. So we have to. Our main objective is to articulate some areas of the municipal government. So we're not talking about only the food security secretariat. We're talking about the environment secretariat. We are talking about the education secretariat, for instance. We are trying to understand how to coordinate actions among the public power and the civil society with the help of the academia, for instance, because they try to bring the expertise on research and so on. So we try to formulate the municipal food and nutritional security plan. So we're talking about the formulation of the policy here, right? We are trying to bring the policy, the discussion of the policy to this council. So to understand the real demands and to understand how can we work on the issues that we are facing here in the city. And so we have to assess and propose strategy, regulations, and projects to find solutions to our problems here in Belo Horizonte. And also, of course, we have to prepare its internal regulations. So next slide, please. Yeah. So since we're talking about a council which is composed by several partners, several areas of the civil and public organization, we can't think about this council without partnerships. So we have some social movements that take part that are interested in taking part on the city council, like the MST, the landless people, right, movement here in Brazil, which is perhaps the largest social movement in the world. We have some civil society engaged in the city council, farmers cooperatives like agroecological cooperatives, urban farmers cooperatives, the academy, right, and some agroecological production NGOs, which are all interconnected and all related, and in this city council trying to figure out ways to understand the city and to figure out ways to solve the city's problems, considering food production, food supply, and agroecological issues. Since I talked to you, we are here in a very urbanized area, so we have to make connections to other cities to provide to provide food supply to the city of Belo Horizonte. So next slide, please, Nadine.
Bruno, we have 1 more minute if that's fine with you.
1 more minute. Okay. So to sum up.
Sorry, it's exciting, but we
Okay.
still have some other speakers. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, no problem. We're going to sum up here, right? We are just finishing the how it works. So the city council, it's a listening platform because we have to understand the reality of the population demands. We're talking about the where, for instance, where are the food swamps, where are the desert swamps within the city? Who are the people which is the most affected by this food and desert food and food desert and food swamps, and why this happens? Is it a food supply problem, right? So we have to get closer to the civil society, and we have to gather the civil society with the public power to strategic plan on how we are going to act and how we are going to propose a policy to solve these issues. So we are talking about food supply and also income production too. So I believe the most important thing about the city council here in Belo Horizonte is that the civil society takes part on the decision-making process. Okay, the next slide. You can you can move to the final slide, please, Nadine. So because I'm out of time, I would like to thank you again. Okay, and we are very pleased to be here. And if you have any doubts, you can write to this email, and I'll be glad to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Bruno, for your presentation. And I'm sorry that you didn't have enough time to share everything, but we have your slides, we have your contact. So anyone who's in the webinar interested for more exchange, we can connect with you, hopefully. And maybe some people will also post questions for you. Thanks a lot for bringing the perspective from your city. With that, moving on, we're having another question that one of my colleagues will post in the chat to you all, to the webinar participants. So Kanak, can one of you put it in the chat and share the slide? Thank you. So I hope you can all see it and access that. Because we would like to understand from the participants, like, what can a food policy council work for in your city? You heard now the example from Cologne, you heard the example from Brazil. What scope would you see? And I think from the Brazil example, it was also really good to hear that you looked at inclusion, like what are the food deserts, swamps, like how people are differently affected from the food environment in the cities. So I think we got a very good comprehensive overview of different examples, and we would like to know more from you. So you can post your answers in the chat. I'm not sure if the Slido works now. Some of my team members can just come in and share if Slido works or not. Can you share that, please?
So the link should be working, Nadine, but unfortunately we are not able to share the results on screen right now.
Okay, so but the link is working. Okay, so then people can still log in and share their responses, please, on the Slido link. Thank you. And while you all logging into that, I would like to hand over to Nandini. She's now the moderator for our panel discussion. And I'm inviting her and the panelists to come on camera and take you through some interesting discussion. Over to you, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadine, and thank you those who actually answered on the Slido. Maybe post in the follow-up email, we can always share what kinds of answers were shared by everyone, so we also know what people are inclined to and what we're thinking about cities in India. But thank you so much to all the presenters and to Nadine. Moving on straight into the panel discussion. Hello again. We're here to discuss the initiatives in Indian cities for sustainable food systems transformations and the opportunities for food policy councils in India. Here we have experts Vibha Varshne, Shaleen Meelu, and Siddhant Kumar. I'll briefly introduce them before I go right into the questions. So Vibha Varshne is a consulting editor and journalist for the Center for Science and Environment with over 2 decades of experience. She has conceptualized the first food series, which connects the dots between biodiversity, nutrition, health, and livelihood. Shaleen Meelu is a public health nutritionist who spent the past decade working with local governments to develop urban food policies. She established a nutrition partnership between Pune and her home city, Birmingham, and supported the launch of Eat Smart Cities in India. Siddhant Kumar is a research analyst at the People's Resource Center. He is currently engaged in policy outreach on urban agriculture with Municipal Corporation of Delhi and has published several works related to urban local governance in India. Welcome, Shaleen, Vibha, and Siddhant to this discussion, and thanks for joining us today. So getting right into the questions, Vibha, I would first come to you. Please tell us from your experience from the past 20 years of your work, what, according to you, are the main challenges of food environments or food systems in our cities? And as you answer that question, I would also like to invite you to spend a couple of lines on what food environment really means as a concept for some of the listeners who might not be aware of it. Over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me for this webinar. So the food environment represents a range of foods that can be accessed by people. It depends on a lot of different things, but basically that's the overall definition. What can you access? How can you access it? But in big cities, the problem is that the range of what you can access is very limited. So in terms of fresh food, if you go to the market, you would see that just around a dozen or so of vegetables are available and some similar number of fruits are available. There is very little awareness about good food. The biggest challenge is to eating well is lack of availability and access to local, seasonal, nutritious, tasty, and biodiverse food. So this lack of choice is of a lot of concern because India has a whole lot of biodiversity and we have a local tradition of consuming the local biodiversity, what is locally available and what is seasonal. So, but everything is not lost because we still have vestiges of some kind of biodiversity which can be consumed as food still around us, even in the cities. So Center for Sciences and Environment has published a series of books on local food, and we have highlighted and showcased some more than 100 indigenous ingredients. And from what we find out while working on these books is that these traditional ingredients are still available even in the metros. So I would give you some examples of that. For example, in Delhi, you have the peepal tree and the pilkun tree, which are very common ficus species, and they are available in every street and every corner of the city. So around March and April, these trees sprout new leaves, and these leaves can be consumed as food as a stir-fried vegetable. You can just also add these leaves to your local average food like dal and sabji, and that would increase the nutritive value of these of your regular fare. Similarly, we have native trees like gular, which is the country fig, and lasoda, which is Cordia dichotoma. It's a very sticky fruit, and these grow very easily. These are local, these are indigenous trees in Delhi, and they still are available in some kind of pockets and parks in the city. So the fruits of these can be consumed as a vegetable. And we also have mulberry trees, bay trees, jamun trees across the city, and we can easily pluck a few fruits whenever we want to do that. Uh, and if you this during this rainy season, if you go out and check out the sides of the roads or the footpaths, you would see that you have vegetable crops, plants, herbs like kulfa, the punarnava plant, or the wood sorrel, which can be used as a green leafy vegetable. So, and if you don't want to pluck from the roadside, you can easily grow them in pots or vacant plots also, because they're very easy to grow and they're very hardy plants. Unfortunately, there is no awareness about these sustainable foods around us. So consumption will increase only if there is awareness about how they can be used, and there's knowledge about how to cook them and eat them, because most of the times people are very scared of eating things by just plucking on the from the tree, because they have not seen that these things in the market. These are not available in the local markets. So this awareness has to be created. There's another aspect about the current food environment that is worrisome, that we are wasting a lot of food that is available around us. For example, we get carrot in the market, in the mandi, very easily. But you will never find the leaves of a carrot uh, in the market. And these are also food. They can be used as a green sabji, a leafy vegetable. But nobody uses it because it's never available in the market. Similarly, the rind of the watermelon can be used to cook a sabji, but it's stir-fried sabji, and it is very tasty. Unfortunately, all of it is thrown out of our house and it goes into the landfill, so it's all wasted. So overall, we have a lot of things around us that we can consume, but we do not, because we have no awareness about that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vibha, for highlighting that actually there are still remnants of these traditional knowledge and ways of consuming biodiverse foods, but I guess the important idea is to bring it back onto people's minds and plates. So awareness and accessibility definitely become two main challenges. Moving on to Siddhant, just because this is a very smooth transition that you've kind of given to me, so thank you, because PRC does do a lot of work on starting the conversation on urban futures, right? They have had a lot of multi-stakeholder discussions with all the sections of the society to talk about what do food futures look like, what can they look like in cities. So Siddhant, according to the People's Resource Center, please highlight some of the work that may already be happening in these cities, or from the research that you've done can potentially happen in the cities to transform our urban food systems.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So basically, so PRC work has mostly been urban farm and communities, and mostly around Delhi. So basically, in the context of Delhi, you don't have an urban farming department in the state government, and so the PRC research has mostly campaigned for bringing in, urban agriculture in the Delhi government department, and that's one of the potential area that we have identified in securing food systems in local food system in the context of Delhi. So we did a survey in Delhi on urban farmers, and we found that around 10% of Delhi's food demands are being met by these local farming communities, and while most of the food in Delhi comes from neighboring states, which is around like 90%. So urban farming as a practice, it can be inculcated within the broader government framework, and that's one of the area where which you can which you can tap into ensure food systems, local food systems basically. The second area where we have been working on and where we have researched is the integration of food waste into farming communities. Delhi has like a huge waste problem, and so we have tried to link that with the food waste to the farming practices. For example, there's this one, in practical terms you can see that happening in kitchen gardens. For example, the domestic food waste that is usually can be used in rooftop farming. So those are like one of the areas where you can tap in to enhance the urban local food systems. And basically, so these are like the two broader areas, like inclusion of urban farming into the government policies, and creating a sector within the Delhi government department. And the other is bringing in the connection, the interrelationality between food waste and urban farming. So
Thanks.
that's, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Siddhant, for that succinct answer. And I mean, it's really now coming together. There's a lot of context setting that has happened through the webinar in terms of what is happening, for example, in Chennai, in Delhi, what we can do in the cities. Charlene, coming to you, you have worked with multiple cities and multiple local governments to establish food strategies. And when we talk about food policy councils, they don't essentially just look at one part of the system, but we're really talking about systemic transformation in urban areas for food. So basically, what role do you think food policy councils can play in Indian cities from your experience of the past?
Thank you, Nandini. I think you described food policy councils really well. So they're multi-stakeholder platforms and can be either top-down, bottom-up, or hybrid. I think that the role of food policy councils, wherever they are, is to support the transition to a healthier, sustainable food system. And there has to be a big emphasis on dietary diversity, which has already been mentioned by the other panelist, and ensuring access to nutritious, sustainable food for all. My personal opinion, I was thinking about this and listening to colleagues, is that a big role of Food Policy Council in Indian cities is to make visible the food system challenges and opportunities. And challenges include food insecurity, malnutrition, issues around food waste. Earlier we mentioned, when Eat Smart Cities was mentioned, food hygiene and safety. There are some new challenges which are being mentioned a lot with the other cities that I'm working with around the protein transition. So when we think about sustainability and climate change, how can we ensure that everyone has access to protein without wanting animal-based protein? So that relates to sustainable production, which Siddhant has just been talking about, but also importantly, supply and distribution. So how do we think about the way that food is coming into the city or is being produced in the city and then distributed everywhere? And a food policy council needs the big overview. If we're talking about systemic transformation or systems transformation, we need everyone on the council to understand what the bigger picture is for the city. And I think demonstrating how to address challenges, and also in some cases now what we need to motivate and galvanize efforts is to demonstrate how to turn challenges into opportunities. So let's stop talking about food waste and start talking about circular food systems is going to be really important, because we need to step up action. Food policy councils need to be not just passionate about nutrition and food. I'm a public health nutritionist and I obviously love food and I love nutritious food. But we don't just want people like me there. We want people that have the ability to give change makers access to resources. We want people who can influence policy and advocate for food system transformation at multiple levels. So the city needs to be able to communicate with the state, needs to be able to communicate with the national level. And you have stakeholders in this meeting which represent all of those levels. So that's a great start. We also need to be able to, and this is absolutely essential, engage communities and empower them and develop resilience plans. So we could be prepared for another pandemic. We can be prepared for climate change, diminishing water, which is what colleagues were talking about in Chennai, and also recovery from disasters. And finally, making a humongous, massive effort to address inequality. And so I was reading a Frontiers paper. This is like almost like communication for the public on food policy councils, on the role of food policy councils. And in Europe, they're saying that we're still struggling to engage those that are most hard hit by the food system. So people living in poverty, people from diverse backgrounds, and we need to make an extra effort to do that. In India, the communities, the cities that I've worked with, Pune, made an effort to engage women and worked with great civil society organizations. They had great relationships with civil society organizations to really access the communities in need. And so for me, a food policy council is an example of democracy in action. So participatory democracy through community engagement is essential, and that plays a strong role in that. Deliberative democracy, so inclusive dialogue, transparency and accountability, and civic engagement. So the one thing that I would say as a public health nutritionist is education needs to be non-stop along this journey. And because otherwise with food, everyone has their own thoughts about what's right, what's wrong, and so on. So we need some consistent advice.
Thanks, Charlene, for a very comprehensive, almost a roadmap in terms of what Food Policy Council should do. And to begin with, it's really about changing the narrative of, hey, here are the challenges, but there are also possible solutions. So let's start talking about that, which some of the stakeholders in this webinar are already doing. We are running short on time, so I'm actually going to have to ask one question to all of you, and I hope that you could really just wrap up the answer within 1 to 2 minutes. And well, Charlene has so well kind of described so many challenges and at the same time opportunities for food policy councils to work in India, but really to look at the starting point, right? What are the low-hanging fruits in some of the Indian cities that you have interacted with or worked with to start food policy councils? Where can we start? Would be my question to all of you, starting with Vibha.
Okay. So the effort should be, I think, towards increasing biodiversity on the plate. The reason for that is very simple. India is one of the 17 mega biodiverse countries across the world, and we have 11% of the world's plant species. So we have a lot of things around us that can be consumed. We have a tradition of using them, and we have the knowledge about how to prepare these foods and into food, into recipes. So that's one thing that we can do. The first thing that I think the Food Council should do is to identify what is available around us, already available around us. As I mentioned, there are trees and there are plants already available around us that we can consume. So there should be awareness around these. There's a need to increase the awareness about them, and there should be, markets should be created so vendors can forage and bring it to the market, put it into the formal system of markets. The second thing I think would be to plant more of these trees around us. These should be local trees, local foods, which would fit each of the city, and these can be planted trees and plants that can be consumed. There should be more of these. They can be grown in community parks, schools, vacant lots, or anything. Anywhere you find space, there has to be an effort to include that into the purview of a food council. The third would be there is already positive action towards this. Lots of people are growing these things. Lots of people are providing their high-end businesses which are collecting it from different parts of the country and bringing it to the urban society. So that is there. And lots of chefs are actually using these ingredients and creating awareness about these foods, and which is a very positive step. So there is some good happening, but more can be done, yes. But the last suggestion that I would like to make is that these food councils should also start in rural areas simultaneously, because we don't want people there to start eating bad and then shift over to good food. It should be a simultaneous effort across the country.
Thank you so much, Vibha. These are some very important points that I will take the time to kind of just summarize later on. Straight over to you, Siddhant.
Yeah, I mean, picking up from what Viva said, that there has to be space made for urban farming in schools as well as in parks. So one of the areas like in Delhi where where it lacks in urban farming is that the Delhi master plan does not has any land use plan for urban farming. So I think one should start there to bring in urban farming. And secondly is the, one can tap into the national education policy, which which are being implemented by the government in schools. So it has an element of agriculture as vocational program. So we have been doing that through workshops in schools, and also imparting students the know-how of rooftop farming, and basically that mostly falls under the ambit of national education policy vocational programs. So those are like one of the two of the suggestions which can be tapped in for ensuring food security. Apart from that, I think there also needs to be a lot of you know use of native knowledge regarding local urban practices. For example, the use of organic fertilizers, or for that matter, you know uh, like like the case of Yamuna farming. You have this vilification against the Yamuna urban farmers, that the urban farming is basically intoxicating groundwater, but it's not the case. Like urban farmers accounts, they don't say that it's harming the groundwater. So one has to also take into account their experiences and what their knowledge has been to bring in urban farming as a practice within the city context. So yeah, so broadly those are like my suggestions. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Siddhant. Charlene, same question to you. Request you to please keep it to 2 minutes or under.
I'm going to
Thank
keep
you
it
so
really
much.
brief. I'm going to
Yeah.
keep it to 1.5 minutes. Okay, so I think the most important thing, and possibly because I'm witnessing that cities aren't doing this, is a nutrition situational analysis, or you can call it a food system situational analysis. So you have a starting document which explains to everyone that you're going to engage, your stakeholders, what the current issues are. What are the issues for the city? What are people eating too much of? How are they eating? And that also involves an element of citizen engagement. So we did both in the Pune Birmingham partnership, and we launched a more global program. We encourage people to do both as well. And then the other thing is that I like the engagement of political leads. I think that adds a lot more. So if you can't, then that's fine. It doesn't mean that the Food Policy Council can't work. But if you can get a political lead who's a lovely human person who cares, to get involved in your work rather than somebody who just wants an award, then that will transform your prospects of transformational change.
Thank you so much. So just to wrap up this discussion, and to all the actors who are already present in this webinar and who work on this topic already, I guess what we're hearing in terms of what do we do to start a food policy council in Indian cities are essentially from the production side or from the, biodiversity side, plant more local regional varieties of trees that are biodiverse and can be also used for eating and increasing nutritional availability to people, also enabling rooftop farming, making sure that the urban farmers also have access, information, knowledge, resources to transition to sustainable agriculture and understand the consequences to, for example, watersheds. The second thing is, well, working with chefs. We already have Thomas, who's very active on the chat right now. Thanks, Thomas. But also working with other chefs in restaurants and enabling market structures for those kinds of food is another thing that I heard from this discussion. The third thing would be a very important point that, well, what is the nutritional situation in the city right now? We need data gatherers. We need to analyze that kind of situation and start from there also. That's also a call to action for all the people who are listening there. And of course, engaging and advocating at policy level is something that all of us can do together. So these are just some of the initial starting points and ideas for us. And well, we hope to kickstart some sort of action for Food Policy Council from here on. Thank you so much for your inputs in this panel discussion. And with that, I would bring it back to Nadine.
Thank you, Nandini. Thank you, panelists, for your really interesting perspectives. They gave us, I think, more food for thought and inspiration. I hope you can bear with us that we will take 15 more minutes. We hope you can stay tuned. We wanted to now go to a Q&A session, and I want to invite my colleague Lisa to come in because she kept an eye on the chat throughout our webinar. And over to you, Lisa, to ask some of the questions.
Yes, thanks, Nadine. And it's really great to see so much engagement in the chat, and a lot of connections are being made, resources are being shared. So do please have a look as well. Coming to the questions, we have two questions which are addressed to the first presentation by Christoph and Peter. I hope Christoph is still with us. I just saw him and he can respond to that. So one would be on the indicators for considering a region urban farming friendly. Maybe you can share quickly about that, as well as the question if you're addressing food self-sufficiency issues in Chennai Metro City as well.
Yes, hi. It's really fascinating to listen to all the speakers here, and gives us actually a lot of inspiration to proceed further. We are actually right at the beginning of our project, and I think the water food nexus is one of those really crucial intersections, as I mentioned earlier already, for the city. So we have not developed indicators so far. Actually, what we are focusing on at the moment is to bring the stakeholders together to create the momentum for a food policy council. So we are in a kind of exploratory situation at the moment, a phase that is basically trying to generate an interest and also the eagerness of different organizations and institutions, from the local to the city government, and eventually also the Tamil Nadu government, because we believe that eventually it needs a strategic food policy for the city region to answer many of these questions. And we have basic funding only, so we are not able at the moment to conduct these kind of supportive studies. So I can't actually say much about this at the moment. That's the situation.
Thanks. No, thanks, Christoph. Yes, there's a lot of highlighting in the chat on the importance of the consumer side, the awareness, the campaign. So I think these are also really good inputs to look at, and definitely something we want to, or we would take up for the next kind of webinars, or how we are going to continue the series. There was one more question, which is asking how do we deal with the city master plans in India, where there is often no space for growing food or little consideration of urban agriculture. So how can we go forward to build food policy in the urban areas guided by master plans? There is no specific speaker, but I think maybe Siddhant, you would be a good person to respond to that, since you already were touching upon this in your experiences in Delhi.
Yeah, so since master plan is mostly, it's a Delhi government state policy, as well it's also complemented by the central government, to design the land use, in Delhi context. But so it does not has a, local mechanism to get feedback. So maybe if there is a local mechanism to get feedback from the urban farming communities, so you might be able to solve that problem. But I mean, most of the time governments come in and they promise that, but that never happens. So I think there has to be like a huge pressure from the civil society organizations also to, maybe like protest and dissent to include urban farming communities' voices and their rights within the Delhi master plan. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks. One more question that came in on the consumer side. Every consumer should get benefits, not only urban or semi-urban. Also, policy level changes are required to give benefits to consumers. How can food policy councils take up that challenge? Okay, that's I think it's a quite difficult question. I think it also goes towards the equality issues that have been highlighted. I don't know if Bruno, if you're still there and you want to share on that. No, okay. Then
He
he had
apologized
to leave.
and
Oh,
but he had
okay.
another
invite,
meeting. Yeah.
we
All
could
right.
perhaps invite Charlene to answer that
Yes,
question.
yes, that would be the.
Sorry, I was just Googling recipe for watermelon skin subsie. So could you repeat the question, please? I'm really sorry about that. That was
No worries.
how
So the
can food
question,
sorry, carry
yeah,
on.
the question is, so every consumer should benefit, not just urban or semi-urban. So we need policy changes as well to give benefit to consumers, and how can this be taken up in food policy councils?
Yeah, so that's why I actually mentioned that from the city point of view, having a political lead or a champion is key to start that discussion. And the other thing is that now people are thinking more deeply about rural-urban linkages. And so I'll give a good example. I'm working with 11 cities in Europe at the moment, and one of them, Bordeaux, has a fantastic new food strategy, a brilliant operationalization strategy, and is also really effective at working with the various levels of government in France. And that is helped by the French government themselves have enabled have enabled an environment for the regions to start thinking about food policy. So, for example, they have laws on food waste that have to be enacted at different levels. So in terms of making policy changes, that from the city point of view, even if you're a hybrid model or a grassroots driven model, try and find some political support or senior level support. And another good way of achieving that is encouraging your city to sign up to the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. So if people don't know about that, that's like this global movement of cities. Can I just, before we finish, can I just give you an amazing example? I read a study recently, and one of the discussions now, the big discussion is, what do we actually mean by transformation? And I read a paper recently by a community organization in New York working with very low-income groups, and they set up a locally produced food business supporting early year centers, so tackling early years nutrition, giving employment to low-income communities who are not working. So they're really thinking about it from a systems approach. They got their money from a philanthropist, but the thing they said was that it was state and city level policies that created an environment for them to make things happen. And so actually that's why this continuous dialogue needs to be taking place. It's hard work, as we discussed.
Thanks a lot. Thank you so much for your responses and the questions. I would just like to hand over now to Pavan Agarwal to sum up, maybe give an outlook to our next steps. And I hope we can all stay connected. And yeah, with that, over to you, Pavan. You're muted.
Thank you, Nadin, for brilliant moderation of this unique webinar. If you remember when we started our journey on COFT, on Coalition for Food System Transformation, and food environments was one of the area of work, we did not find even a couple of people who could basically give life to this action lab. And now we have more than 100 people who joined this call. And this is already a community who is looking at issues around urban food environments and will look at these issues more creatively. I think this is indeed a big outcome of this webinar. Rahul Kapoor, in his brilliant remarks, he candidly accepted that food issues are not really in the mind space of the urban affairs ministries at the national or state governments or at the even the municipal level. And in some sense, this is a good opportunity to bring it on the center stage, because soon we are going to be more dominant urban society. By 2030, more than 50% of our people will be living in urban areas. So this is this is an opportunity and maybe a very timely thing that we start thinking of food environments in the city contexts in the context of urban areas. So, five takeaways as we move forward. I think a brilliant exposition of how food policy councils around the world are structured. Perhaps if we could document it and produce a note, and there is already a suggestion on the chat that Vibha could do it and write an article in Down to Earth. I don't know if Vibha is there and she takes that challenge of writing something on. Vibha, are you there?
Yes, Dr. Agrawal, I'm here and I have noted that down.
Okay. No, I thought you may not miss it, and therefore I repeated it in my remarks. Okay, so I think documentation of this is important because this is the first time we are bringing, a discussion around food policy councils to Indian audiences, people who matter in India. And Rahul was, I don't know whether he's there, but he was until very recently on the call. And he was listening very intently about it. Second is, we did discuss a little bit on data, importance of data and benchmarking, for cities to perform in different areas. So can we get, food explicitly in those rankings and data matrices, including that of the national, this smart city challenge, which currently is focused on 10 themes, which includes water, sanitation, mobility, etc., etc. So, can we have the 11th theme around food environments? So, that is going to be, I think, very important. If we get it, I'm sure the cities will start focusing on areas that are explicitly included in that matrix. And so it can be done with other municipal bodies, etc. The third area is around street food, vending. There is an opportunity here. Recently, Government of India has announced a big initiative around making 100 street food vending zones in cities in India. So, can we learn some things from other countries in that area, and how can we have more community engagement and involvement in this, street food, vending zones in India, in the Indian cities? The fourth area we can think in terms of healthy food environments, particularly in public places, near schools, transport hubs, etc. So where a lot of uh, purchase of food happens. So can those public places have healthy food environments, and which will nudge people to buy healthy and food and eat healthy food? And the fifth area is around the food waste, which I think everyone focused on. Several of the food policy councils are working on this very important area. While the food is grown in rural areas, but it is eaten and wasted in urban areas. There's a lot of food waste in India. Part of it is, some of it is because of traditions, because of our social structures, etc. This is an area where there's a lot of good work that has been happening around the world, and mentioned about France and a few other countries. So there is a lot to learn. At a national level, it may be very difficult to do, but we can always attempt those things at a city level through city-wise regulations and guidelines. So these are the five areas I can see. I'm sure that those of you who are on this call must be thinking on the same lines and may have other ideas as well. So we have our email ID, and I think Nadine will just show you contact.kofti@gmail.com. So kindly reach out to us. We'll welcome your participation in this action lab on food environments, and I think there are a lot more that can be done in this particular space, and this in some sense is a greenfield for India, because we have not begun to think about food in the context of urban areas. Thank you very much for your participation. I hand it over to Nadine to
thank you so much
a formal vote of thanks.
Yeah, so thank you for summarizing this with some concrete outcomes or next steps where we could all work on together. And I also just like to highlight what Charlene said. I think it's great to realize what are the challenges and see what the opportunities are in it. So let's move this together forward.